Good evening. My name is Kimberly Esmond Adams, and I have the privilege of presiding as a judge on the Superior Court of Fulton County here in Atlanta. I also have the awesome privilege of serving as chair of the Judicial Council of the National Bar Association. And I first want to say thank you for being here this evening for what we hope will be an informative and engaging discussion about the importance of jury service entitled Step Up and Sit Down. I have the awesome privilege of presiding over a robust discussion tonight with very, very learned, experienced, and dynamic members of our local legal community. And you'll have an opportunity to hear from them over the course of the next several minutes. And we certainly hope that at the end there will be a few minutes for us to answer any questions that you might have. So before we get started, I'm excited to see you all. I want you all to give yourselves a hand for being here and thinking that it was important enough to show up tonight. The Judicial Council of the National Bar Association has been in existence for 52 years. We are a division of the National Bar Association, which is the voluntary bar associations for African American attorneys. Each year, we have a series of dynamic programs under the leadership of the chair. And one of my initiatives this year was to make the point as a trial judge that serving as a juror is particularly important. And if you're wondering why it's important, many of you can think about significant cases over the past several years. Trayvon Martin, Rodney King from several years ago, most recently the George Floyd case, and there are a number of other cases that you can probably think about. And oftentimes when you think about those cases, or in other circumstances, situations where grand juries have decided that there was insufficient evidence to bring an indictment, you want to know how that process works and you want to understand how those decisions are made. Well, those decisions are made by citizens like each of you across the country each and every day. And one of the challenges that we have as a demographic in particular is that we don't quite get it. We don't understand how powerful our voices are in our justice system. And until we decide that we are going to be invested and in fact step up and sit down, then we can't complain about the verdicts that are rendered in courtrooms across America. We can't complain about the decisions that grand jurors make to indict or not bring formal charges against individuals in different circumstances. We can't complain when there are civil cases and folks who look like us from our community don't receive what we think is their fair measure of justice. We have tremendous power, and each of you has tremendous power as a citizen in the respective community where you live. And so we're hoping that over the course of the evening, as we share different thoughts about this process, different experiences, anecdotes that the lawyers will share with you, that you will come to appreciate just how important your service is. And I just want to share with you a quote from my hero, and I'm sure that many of you feel the same way. And this is from Thurgood Marshall when he served on the Supreme Court of the United States. And this happened to be a case involving a white defendant convicted of burglary here in Muskogee County, Georgia, in Columbus. And the conviction was reversed based on the exclusion of African Americans from the jury. And what he said was, when any large and identifiable segment of the community is excluded from jury service, the effect is to remove from the jury room qualities of human nature and varieties of human experience, the range of which is unknown and perhaps unknowable. So just think about that. If you think about that room where 12 citizens, sometimes 6 citizens gather, and if you imagine that room without voices from diverse perspectives, I'm sure that you can imagine that the results that are reached are not always the best outcomes, but they also don't always reflect the kind of rigor that the deliberative process should facilitate. So without any further ado, I do want to take a moment to introduce you and allow them to introduce themselves to you, the extraordinary panelists that we have. And I'm taking them out of order, but I want to start by introducing a young woman who serves as president of the Georgia Association of Black Women Attorneys, that we affectionately call GABWA, who is in fact one of our partners for this evening. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to present to you Attorney Terica Gansey-Redfield, who is president of the Georgia Association of Black Women Attorneys, but she also serves as executive director of the Southern Center for Human Rights. Terica?
Thank you, Judge Adams.
You're very welcome.
Especially thank you for referring to me as a young woman.
That means I'm young
I
too.
appreciate that. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. I am Terica Redfield Gansey, and I am serving as the 42nd president of the Georgia Association of Black Women Attorneys. We are charged with nurturing, supporting, and galvanizing the power of Black women attorneys, advocating for women and children, and empowering our communities. And so us supporting this event tonight is about empowering our communities. I also serve as executive director of the Southern Center for Human Rights. And at the Southern Center, we work for equality, dignity, and justice for people impacted by the criminal legal system. We work to end mass incarceration, the death penalty, the criminalization of poverty, and racial injustice. And so I am happy to be here and to have been invited to be a part of this panel.
Thank you, Terica. Thank you very much. Let's give her another hand. It is also my profound pleasure and privilege to introduce to you another member of Cascade, and I neglected to say in the introductory remarks that I've been a member of this church for more decades than I'd like to admit, because I don't want anybody to start trying to guess how young I might be. But Judge Toomer and I have been members of this church for many, many years. She has recently retired as the chief probate judge in Fulton County, where she served with distinction for over 30 years, and currently she chairs the legal ministry here at Cascade United Methodist Church. Judge Toomer.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I think my mic's on, right? It's nice to be here, and I thank you for joining us this afternoon or this evening. I'm privileged to be among this distinguished panel. So this is an awesome opportunity for us to talk about the importance of jury service, which is rare in probate courts. But in Georgia, there are some counties where probate courts can hold jury trials. So I thank you if you're interested in listening to when and why, especially after the Aretha Franklin case, probate service by jurors can be very, very important. So thank you for being here and for giving us your listening ear. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Toomer. Let's give her a hand. Next, I am pleased to have with us this evening the public defender for the Atlanta Judicial Circuit, which encompasses all of Fulton County. Attorney Maurice Kenner has been in that role for, I believe, about 3 years now, is that right? Two. I was close. And I'm delighted that he was able to join us tonight. And so, Attorney Kenner, if you'd introduce yourself.
Thank you for inviting me. My name is Maurice Kenner. I'm the public defender for Fulton County. I head an office of 127 attorneys and 63 support staff to include investigators, social workers, administrative assistants, and paralegals. We have attorneys that operate in magistrate court, superior court, state court, and the newer accountability courts. You all may have heard of drug court, veterans court. We have attorneys that represent citizens of Fulton County in all of those courts. I've been in this position right at about 2 years, but prior to that, I was one of the deputy directors for the Georgia Public Defender Council. This is my 29th year of doing 99.9% of criminal defense work, and I enjoy every day of it.
Thank you. Can we give Attorney Kenner a hand? Next, I am delighted to have with us this evening a former colleague. We actually served together in the district attorney's office. I won't tell him how long so that neither of us is revealed. But we had the opportunity to work as colleagues. He is now working in private practice and has his own thriving practice. He's also worked as a criminal defense attorney, and he'll tell you more about that. But please join me in welcoming Attorney Gabriel Banks.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Judge Adams, for the invitation, and to all you members of Cascade. Certainly delighted to be here to share with all of you in this important event. My name is Gabe Banks, and I am the managing partner of the Banks Weaver Law Firm. We generally specialize in some criminal defense on the very high end, and we also specialize in high complex civil litigation when someone is personally injured, whether it's a serious motor vehicle accident and or an apartment complex shooting, for example. I'm excited to be here to talk about this because I'm reminded that our country only calls upon its citizens on two occasions, to actually perform a duty. The first is military service. And we haven't had a draft in quite some time, but when we had a draft, ultimately people would be obligated to serve based upon the draft. Of course, we honor the men and women who protect our country on a day-to-day basis. But the other duty that we're called to perform is jury duty. And when you receive a summons, you're actually required to respond to the summons. One of her former colleagues, Judge Russell, would always say to some of the prospective jurors during trial, you can either serve or you can serve. In other words, you can respond to the service or the summons and show up and honor your civic duty, or you can serve in the Fulton County Jail because you've neglected your civic responsibility. And so you can either serve or you can serve. And so I'll leave you with that and look forward to talking with all of you as we go through the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabe. Next, I am extremely delighted to have one of my sister friends in the law. She is a past president of the National Bar Association and has only been in Atlanta for probably a decade now, but she came onto the legal scene and just kind of burst on the scene and made herself right at home, and we love her. She responds anytime I call, and I am pleased that she was able to join us this evening. Attorney C.K. Hoffler.
Well, thank you so much. I have to pay homage to, and I know it's dangerous to say this, one of the most extraordinary judges of all times, and that would be Judge Kimberly Esmond Adams. So we have to give her a round of applause.
See, that's why she makes so much money.
Exactly right.
See, ain't never one of us said anything about Judge Adams, but she knows how to get Judge Adams' attention.
No. But I've been blessed to practice throughout the country, and I've seen a lot of judges. I'm a trial lawyer, and I practice with, I believe some of the best trial lawyers in the world, Willie Garrett being one. And so Judge Kimberly Esmond Adams is the best, and I'm just so proud to be here to talk about the importance of serving on a jury. I do have my own, I'm the CEO of my own law firm. I specialize in catastrophic injury work, including opioid cases, for instance. I've done tobacco litigation, commercial litigation, that's like breach of contract. Injury work, if it's catastrophic in an automobile accident, medical negligence. And my newest practice area, which I'm proud of, is NIL, name, image, and likeness, because I have 2 Division I college football players, and I felt they needed to be protected. So when it comes to, at the end of the day, to me, other than military service, there's no greater service than being on juries, and it makes a difference in this country. When we see these adverse rulings, and I don't want to preach now, but when we see these adverse rulings, a lot of times I wonder about the jury composition, and I know the jury composition. So we owe it to ourselves to show up and to be there, and to, even though we don't like to do it because we don't want to take the time, we must do it for our communities, and for this country. Thank you so much for including me on this panel.
Thank you, CK. Glad to have you. Just give her another hand. And last but most certainly not least, I'd like to introduce a gentleman who provides tremendous support to the court on which I serve. I met him when he joined us, and he came into our court and has been working hard. He began in our jury division and has been promoted, so now he serves as Deputy Court Administrator for the Superior Court of Fulton County, Mr. Barlin Greathouse.
Thank you, Judge. Before I say anything, I definitely want to echo the comments of CK. Judge Esmond Adams is the best judge we have, and I'm delighted to work with her. She runs a very efficient court, and I'm glad to provide services to her court and the rest of the courts there. I am Murriel Greathouse. I've been an employee of Fulton County Superior Court for 15 years. 5 of those years I spent in jury services. And that's why jury services is so dear and near to me. It's a service to me, it's not a job. It's very important. I realized 2 or 3 years in that while there, I needed to try whenever possible to educate the community about the importance of jury services. So our esteemed panel has said many things up here, and I echo all of those things. It's a very important service. Jury services is oftentimes considered, at least in my eyes, the doorstep to justice. And we need people to answer the door. We need people to be there with eyes and ears to make sure that we are being that check and balance on the justice system, similar to voting. Voting is a check and balance on the executive system. And so it's important to be there, and I'm happy to be here tonight to encourage and talk about the importance of jury services. So thank you again, Judge.
Thank you, Mr. Greathouse. Let's give all of our panelists a hand. So before we get into the meat of it, I'd like to take a moment to introduce one of the associate pastors here at Cascade United Methodist Church. We actually now have 2 locations. Our original location is at 3144 Cascade Road in Southwest Atlanta. And recently, we acquired this beautiful facility, and this is our Midtown campus. Our pastor, Reverend Dr. Kevin Murriel, is on sabbatical this month, but he was aware of this program and very supportive of our efforts, and he left us in the very capable hands of one of our assistant pastors. And so I'd like to bring Pastor Harvey up. This is Reverend Agnes Harvey to offer a word of prayer. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I agree, too, that Judge Adams is just the best. So we will now center ourselves for a moment of prayer. Gracious and merciful God, as we gather today, we recognize the importance of the call of our civic responsibility, particularly, Lord, the call to serve. We humbly come before you, seeking your guidance and encouragement as we encourage others to embrace this vital role of jury duty in our justice system. You call us to be a people who fight for justice and fairness for everyone, and to give justice to the weak and the orphan, and to maintain the right of the lowly and the destitute. Help us to see that serving on a jury is not only a privilege, God, it's a duty and a privilege. And it's a chance to ensure that every individual will receive a fair trial by their peers. Lord, we ask that you stir within our hearts the call to serve. Help us to understand the significance of the role and the impact our decisions can have on the lives of others. Grant us wisdom and discernment to carefully consider how our voice and presence is your voice and presence. Free our time. Remove any prejudices, biases that could cloud our judgment. Oh Lord, fill our hearts with compassion, empathy, and a commitment to uphold the principles of justice as we step up and sit down. In the name of the righteous judge, we pray. Amen.
Thank you for centering us. What a powerful prayer. Thank you, Pastor Harvey. All right, so we are now ready to kind of delve into the meat of this. And as I said, we want to make sure that we have a few moments at the end so that we can take any questions that you might have. And Mr. Greathouse, I'd like to just start with you. Would you talk to our audience tonight about how it is that they end up on our juror rolls and being summoned to serve?
Yes, absolutely. So every year our office, our Jury Services Division, we receive a master list. This master list is comprised and built by the Council of Superior Court Clerks, and they provide that list to us. And we upload that list to our system. We summons over 360,000, or we send out at least 360,000 summons every single year. It's a completely random process. We're not there picking people's names and selecting people. We want this process to be random so that when people show up, it shows that it's the community. It's not someone that we want to be there. It's the community that's there that helps decide these cases that Judge Adams hears on a daily basis. And so we're responsible for bringing you to the court and creating an experience so that you can understand the importance of it, so that when you leave our court, that you can go out and tell the community how important it is and the kind of experience you had. And that's why it's so important that we're here having this forum tonight. But it's really important that when I talk to you all, we don't have enough people showing up like we want to. We want more people, and the only way that we can do that is by having forums like this and creating a juror experience to welcome you so that you can be the voice of your own community, of our community.
And is there a minimum age or an age at which you age out of jury service?
Absolutely. So you have to be at least 18 years old. You have to be a citizen of Fulton County in order to participate in jury services and jury duty. And if you turn 70 years old, you have the opportunity to not participate anymore. Once you turn 70, that doesn't mean that we are disqualifying you. We want everybody to be there. But once you turn 70, you have an opportunity to not serve, and we're more than happy to do that by calling our office.
Right. So, Judge Schumer, I just want to pick up on the last part, that is this age exemption. Since you've now retired from service and have retired from
and have aged, actually.
There are people who come into courthouses across the country and are in fact 70 years of age or older. Some serve, some choose not to serve. Do you have an opinion about that?
I have an opinion. It's nice to reach 70 and above.
I didn't know that you were 70.
Yes, more than 70.
Black doesn't crack.
So, it's interesting. I had this conversation with my husband and another gentleman this evening. We were talking about exemptions from jury service. And when my husband and I talked about it the other day, I said, honey, you know, we could ask for an exemption. We're over 70. And I said, would you do that? And he said, absolutely not. I'm not so sure you would want him on your jury. But he unequivocally said, no, I would not ask for an exemption. So just because you have an exemption does not mean you want to ask for it. We might be the persons who have the time. We still have our faculties about us. We can be fair and unbiased, and we're willing to serve. So I'm sure no one wants a jury panel that is full of seniors, but the idea of doing an exemption is not something we are interested in, and I hope more seniors are like us and willing to serve, because we might have the time now.
And other than the time, is there any other reason that you believe that the service of individuals who are 70 years of age or older, might be important and significant?
Well, I hate to quote my husband, but his theory is we have a lot to contribute to the jury process. Not to say that you're necessarily going to be selected for a jury, but when you reach a certain age, you in theory have something to contribute. I firmly believe that social justice issues can be the one place where we can make a difference where we are. It doesn't have to be a rally. It has to be often you're simply saying yes to a summons. You get the summons, you show up at the courthouse, because social justice issues end up in courthouses. So for that reason, I think service at any age is important.
So let's just pick up right there. Thank you for that, Judge Toomer. Gabe, would you talk to us about why, in your opinion, given the work that you've done as a criminal prosecutor and a criminal defense attorney, and now the work that you're doing on the civil side, why jury service, particularly for members of the African American community, is something that we should regard as the duty that you described earlier?
Sure. So great question. I will say that there was a time, and I think we forget because it wasn't long ago, where blacks and women couldn't serve on juries. People actually died and were killed and bled and fought and did so many things to bring about justice so that we could serve. And the thought that we would not serve when all of what has been done and all the sacrifices that have been made is just kind of troubling, because we go through so much to get here, and then ultimately we take it for granted. And find excuses as to why not to serve. I will say that as an African American former prosecutor, it was so vitally important to have African American jurors on the jury, because not just because they see things differently, but just because culturally there's an experience there in the black community that is just different. So for example, when law enforcement officials talk, I mean, black folk just have different experiences with law enforcement. And it's not to say that black folk are going to walk away or don't have an affinity toward law enforcement. I mean, if something happens, I'm going to call the police. I just am. But it doesn't mean that if a law enforcement official takes the stand that I'm going to necessarily believe what they say because they're a law enforcement. And so that's very important. And ultimately, when you encounter law enforcement, those experiences that you ultimately have with law enforcement will frame your perception or your primary socialization. And so there is a rich experience within the African American community, not just with law enforcement, but just with service in general and with issues of social justice generally that form our opinions about certain things. And that's why it's so vitally important for us to serve.
Thank you, Gabe. CK, I've read lots of research about juries and diversity in juries, and one of the things that the research has indicated is that diverse juries tend not to engage in the groupthink phenomenon. So as it relates to the service of members of our community, of the African American community on juries, would you share with us why you think that is so?
Well, first of all, you know, as a practitioner, I'm a plaintiff's lawyer primarily, which means I fight for people who have no voice. And when I go into a courtroom, Judge Kimberly Esmond Adams, because I love to say Kimberly Esmond Adams.
My husband is here, so
when I go into a courtroom, I go in with Lady Justice. I always start with Lady Justice because Lady Justice is blindfolded. So to think of justice, if she's blindfolded, she has a sword to fight against injustice. She has a shield to protect that verdict. So when you are a juror, and as a practitioner, when I speak to juries, prospective jurors, I want them to know that I hope that they will fight for their verdict. If they are African American, or if they are people of color, it is so important for us to maintain the integrity of the process, and we tend to do that. It's so important to have diverse thinking. Just think of a world where there were no black folk. Well, actually, if we think not too long ago, there was a world where people didn't hear us. But now that we are heard, it's important for us to maintain that voice. So I would say critically important for us to maintain that voice and to remember that we, those lawyers who are trying those cases, fighting for justice, we need you, because we need to hear the diverse thinking. We need you to help educate folks in a room. We don't need you to just go along day long. We need you to, I believe, speak truth to power when necessary. And in my experience, because we polled jurors after, and I've tried a lot of cases where there were no black folk, where there was no diversity, like none, as in none, no diversity whatsoever, in communities that were not very friendly, so shall we say, to African Americans, and judges who were not friendly to black women. But I still got to try my case and win. So we need you all. We need black jurors, and we need you to speak truth to power.
Can I just give an example, too, of what I experienced in the first gang case that was tried here in Fulton County? During voir dire, when I was the prosecutor, we summoned like 300 jurors. One of the jurors was from South Africa. He was actually a soldier and participated in the regime for apartheid. Now, he said all of the right things not to be excused or for a challenge of cause, so to speak, to be used so that he would be excused from service. But if you can imagine that someone who was a soldier from the apartheid regime being on a juror of a person of color, and you decide not to exercise your civic duty in serving, you can imagine how that jury might be swayed. Now, fortunately, they had a black prosecutor, and I wasn't going to put that joker on my jury because I just knew that he wasn't going to be fair, even though he said everything right. And in fact, I got some looks from some of the defense lawyers at the time. You really going to make me use a cause for strike or use one of my strikes to excuse the juror? And so I will say, she mentioned Lady Justice. But sometimes, unfortunately, what happens in the courtroom is not blind.
That's right.
Race is an issue that is all throughout the courtroom, and unfortunately, we don't like to talk about it, but it's present and it's there.
But if you're not there, what we experience is what we see on TV. We don't need to go there. But let's just talk about Florida for 1 second. If you're not there to level the playing field, to bring that perspective, then we are left in a situation where that gentleman from South Africa, let's say you have 3 strikes and there are 4 people who are like that gentleman from South Africa. One of them is getting on that jury. And if there's no balancing factor, which we see with jurors who are African American many times, then we are going to be left with a sense of injustice for our clients.
And it's interesting, Gabe, that you raised this concept of justice not being blind. As members of the Judicial Council, we actually have a logo, and our logo has the blindfold raised because we recognize as jurists that justice isn't blind, right? And that's not a bad thing, but it is an absolute fact. And in my reading, I also recall that the research indicates that diverse juries are more likely to discuss the issue of race during deliberations and not act like it doesn't exist. And so, Mr. Kenner, as the public defender in the most populous and clearly the blackest county, maybe except from DeKalb, in the state of Georgia, and in a jurisdiction where most of the individuals who are charged with criminal offenses look like you and I, what do you see as the significance of having individuals like those who are gathered tonight to sit on juries in the cases that the attorneys, the public defenders in your office defend?
I think it is so important that we have members of the community of color serve on these juries. You bring your life experiences into a jury room, and more importantly, when you look across, particularly in Fulton County, the table and you see a brown-skinned defendant being tried, you see a human being, you see somebody's child, you see somebody's father or grandfather, and I hate to say this, but everybody doesn't see that. They see something totally different. So the only way to combat that is to have other folks of color serving on juries, bringing their perspective and their life experiences and their value to our judicial system to make it work. It can't work without you. And let me just throw this out real quick. Almost every time I try a case, I think of all the blood that was shed for us to be where we are. It did not come easy. Somebody paid the price for us. Many folks paid with their life. And to inconvenience yourself to serve for a day, 2 days, or a week, that's a very small price to pay. Very small price.
Absolutely agree. Terica, in the work that, Attorney Gansey, in the work that you do, which is actually on the other side of jury trials, where you're able to see how race has impacted and infected the trial, and perhaps how the exclusion of African Americans from juries had an impact. Tell us why you think it's important for individuals to serve, and perhaps share some observations that you've had in the work that you've done on the appeal side.
So in our work, particularly in death penalty cases, we have won 5 cases at the United States Supreme Court. The majority of them were based on race discrimination in jury selection.
And I think that's the next, I wanted to stop there for just a moment. What she does is exoneration work. That is, individuals who've been convicted of crimes where the death penalty can be imposed and is often imposed. Her office is responsible for trying to get those individuals their day in court and justice. And so you've been successful in doing that on at least 5 occasions recently?
This is five cases over the course of our history. It's hard to get to the United States Supreme Court and actually get an argument. And so the fact that we've won 5 cases is significant. But it's also significant that so many of the cases that we took to the United States Supreme Court dealt with racial discrimination in jury selection. We've had a case where prosecutors would mark prospective jurors, the white prospective jurors, with a W, and the black prospective jurors with an N. We've had cases.
What letter did you say? A W?
N. I said white prospective jurors with a W. Black prospective jurors with an N.
Letter N.
Mm-hmm. We've had a case where prosecutors excused every single black person who showed up and specifically marked them with a green highlighter so that to make sure they didn't miss excluding certain black jurors. And so what is clear in all of those efforts is if folks would go to those extremes to keep us off a jury, then that must mean it's important for us to be there. That must mean that there's something that we offer to the system that is important. And also, it's important for us to be there because we're worthy, right? We are worthy of being able to participate in this process, just the same way that everybody else is worthy. We've had in our research and investigation post-conviction, we often interview jurors to figure out, because what we're trying to figure out is, did you get a fair trial, right? And we've had jurors say to us how disappointed they were that when they noticed that all of the black jurors were being dismissed, and how frustrating it was for them, how little it made them feel that they were deemed not worthy of being able to sit for a jury. And so it's important for us, because we bring perspectives, like Mr. Kenner just said. We've had cases where it's not just related to race, where it's just about your experience. I remember a case, I think Molly Davis had this case years and years ago, where this woman's child was killed when they were crossing the street. A drunk driver hit the kid, and the woman had not properly crossed at a crossing lane with her children. So she was being prosecuted related to that. And one of the things I remember reading in an article where she said, there were no people on that jury who ride the bus. So it was important for her to have a jury that sort of reflected her experience. And so when we sit home and we decide that, I really don't want to do this, because the truth of the matter is lots of people don't want to do it, but we need you to do it. Like, if I'm in court for something that's really important to me. It's my life is on the line, it's my freedom is on the line, it's my money is on the line, it's my legacy that's on the line, right? And so I would appreciate for us to give me the courtesy of your experience to help make sure that I get the fair trial that I deserve. And so I hope that we understand, we'll put ourselves in that place, right? If you are ever find yourself on that side of the courtroom where you are looking for justice. And use that as an impetus for you to want to participate in this process. We cannot do this without you. Fulton County is a very diverse and a black county, but there are so many counties in Georgia where the defendant might be the only black person in the room, right? And that makes a difference. Representation does matter. I've talked to even public defenders in Mississippi. I've heard folks say, well, the black guy had dreads, so they're a criminal. And it's like, that's the perspective that is going to impact that black person in that courtroom. And so we need folks there that understand culture, but also bring a level of, bring their own personal experience to the process.
And I think that's really important because I don't know that, did you want to add something, Mr.
I just wanted to add, you can't wait until it's your ox being gored to pay attention and participate. It's too late at that point.
And it's interesting you say that because what I often say to jury panels who come before me is, I know that nobody wants to be here, right? And there are a million other things that you want to be doing, but if it were your family member, if it were, your house that was broken into, if it was your child that was killed by a physician because they engaged in negligent practices, you would want people to serve on that jury and deem that case worthy, as you just said, Terica, of showing up. And one of the things that I had not thought about from the perspective that you just mentioned as it relates to jury service, and I thought it was powerful. She said when the defendants are interviewed, they say, it bothers me that people didn't think it was important enough to serve. People who look like me. They give excuses. I've got to work. I need to pick my child up at 2 o'clock. I, just don't want to be here. Us. And we get that jury service is an inconvenience, but we live in a country that demands our participation. And in the absence of that, it's hard for us to ensure, to your point earlier, Mr. Greathouse, that the checks and balances that our system is designed to ensure are in fact happening. So I guess one of the next questions that I really want to talk about is the experiences, the particular experiences that you all have had in the cases that you've tried. And I should share with you that Mr. Kenner, Ms. Hoffler, Mr. Banks have considerable trial experience, that is standing in front of juries and presenting cases. And so I want you to reflect on some cases that you've had where some of the perceptions that President Gansey described may have existed, and why having someone with different experiences and from different backgrounds was important around that deliberation table.
Okay, so I'll take a shot. I had a case. I don't want to discuss all the facts here because I think they may not be suitable for a church. But my client had engaged in behavior that was just completely inappropriate. But my client was originally from the Dominican Republic. And he had died. It was a wrongful death medical negligence case. And so because this is in Gwinnett County, I had to ask how people felt about immigration issues. He was a former law enforcement officer. I had to ask how they felt about police and issues with policing, because there had been a big scandal with excessive use of force in Gwinnett right before my trial. And he and his wife, his wife was there at the table, had come over to this country, and they were undocumented citizens, and then they became citizens. So in asking the question about immigration, I asked how many people felt one way or another, because I try to gauge on a scale of 1 to 10 about immigration and people coming over to this country who are undocumented. Hands went up, and the comments were like this. Well, those people, there were a lot of those people who come over on boats, people, and I didn't come over on a boat, but my ancestors did come over on a boat. Mm-hmm. And this is before Gwinnett became as diversified as it is now. There were a lot of discussions about those people, all those people, and this and that. And what it boiled down to was black people, because my client was black, just happened to be of Dominican heritage. So in the audience, I was able to disqualify a number of jurors because they had a certain view on people who immigrated to this country. I didn't want to say, well, you know, my ancestors immigrated too. I mean, I don't know if they understood that. The other issue was policing. How many people had bad experiences with law enforcement? Because my client's husband was a law enforcement officer. Well, hands went up, and every black hand in the audience went up. Now, the reason why that could have been problematic is because if the hands go up and you talk about the experiences and how you feel as people are trying to get off, that you can't be impartial and give money to the family because he was a member of the Atlanta Police Department, that discussion ensued. So I didn't call on all of the jurors, but a lot of the black jurors were trying to get off because they didn't want to serve. And when I was sitting there and asking questions of other jurors who should not serve, who had racial animus oozing from every orifice of their body, we know when we see it. I'm standing up there. They were savvy enough for those who really wanted to serve to say just the right thing so they wouldn't be excused, whereas many of the black jurors were saying just the right thing so they could be excused. That left me in a very awkward position, a very difficult position. And so, you know, when I'm there, and there was one African-American male who said, well, you know, Ms. Hoffler, I just can't stand law enforcement, and I can't be objective at all. I couldn't give money to the wife of this officer because he was an officer, and you know, and my family, you know, the police came in and they beat my mother. He had like 15 to 20 different examples of what happened to his family. Some of them I thought were fabricated, but he wanted to make a point. And I said to him, he ultimately served on my jury, I said, but if this wonderful judge instructed you on the law, you would be able to follow what this wonderful judge told you to do, right? He said, oh, yeah, I follow. And even though you feel this way, you would put aside those feelings because you'd want to have justice served for this family. Oh, yeah, I want justice. So what I did is I had to insulate. It took me 15 minutes to insulate that one juror, that one black juror, so that he could stay on my venire. And it took me 3.5 days to pick that jury. But when I tell you it was very difficult to preserve the black jurors that I knew would have an open mind in looking at the issues in the case. And it made a huge difference. We won the case, but it made a huge difference. And the battles that I was facing with the other jurors who didn't like immigrants, / didn't like black people, / didn't like people coming here and taking jobs, / didn't like this integration of our communities. All of these themes were discussed, and a lot of people didn't realize what they were saying was so offensive to me personally. I don't like when we have to, you know, have all these different people with different backgrounds. Code, I don't like having black people in my neighborhood. Code, I don't like having black people on the job. Code, I'm not going to give your client a fair shot. That's what it means. But if you're there and you have dialogue on a jury, it does make a huge difference in getting justice for your clients.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I share with juries at the end of trials is that the jury room is the one place where it doesn't matter if you are black, white, Hispanic, or Martian, gay, straight, 25, 70. It doesn't matter if you do labor work or if you're a professional. Everyone in that room gets a single vote. And in order to reach a unanimous decision, they have to talk to each other. So the beauty of that process is people are having conversations across communities and experiences that would otherwise never occur. That's what we bring to jury service. Gabe, are there any particular experiences that you can think of that you'd like to share?
So not individual experiences just yet. I mean, I could probably bring up some, but what I will tell you is my experience as a prosecutor, as an African-American prosecutor, was that oftentimes the jurors that were seated, because many of them were not of color, didn't necessarily trust what I said, as opposed to my white counterparts. It's almost as if I have seen some of my white counterparts, good prosecutors, try cases with very,
Not as good as you.
with a scintilla of evidence. And I'm wondering how in the world did they secure conviction in certain cases when I know full well that they probably shouldn't have because the evidence was just lacking, but it's almost like the jury was left with the impression as if, since we're in the church, that what they said was in red print, like the gospel, like Jesus had said it himself. And so I find myself as a prosecutor not necessarily having a distrust of jurors, but having to prove something to a juror because I'm an African-American lawyer that is saying something. And on the defense side, I just tried a murder case and a vehicular homicide case, one in June and another one in May. Let me tell you, I put together an effective, it was an effective presentation. One of them, I believe, was truly innocent. Now, the other one, maybe not so, but he still got a good trial. Having said that, sometimes as a black lawyer, I walk away with the impression, particularly on the vehicular homicide case, if a white lawyer would have tried this case, would they have believed the white lawyer if it was tried in the same way? Because there was not a stone that wasn't unturned in defending the case, so to speak. And so I will say that your presence is necessary because I need somebody just that looks like me as the lawyer. The heck with my client who's African-American oftentimes, but oftentimes I need people of color that won't just hold me to a higher standard, so to speak, but will accept what I'm saying as true just because, I'm a part of this noble profession and I'm not just saying it just to be saying it.
Can I just add one thing of an experience that happened to me? And when I say that we have the finest judge around, I mean it, because I've been before judges who may not trust me, I believe, because I'm an African-American woman. This is real, may not trust. And so again, it's not just with the prospective jurors, but sometimes with judges. I was picking a jury here in Fulton County, let me not get too specific. And I had on the front row, on day 2 of picking a jury, I had 5 or 6 white women who I did not want on my jury for many reasons. Many, many reasons. I could have given, and I did ultimately give justification as to why they should not be on my jury. I had previously had some black people in a previous row where I wanted many of them on the jury because there were reasons why I wanted them on the jury. So when I was going through the process for cause, setting up so that I could strike the white women jurors that were there, again, I'm representing my client. I'm trying to pick a jury that's best for my client. And I was doing what I was doing within the rules, within the law, because there's one thing we have to be is prepared. There's no room for, I thought, prepared. The judge excused the jury. She was really upset. She excused the jury because I hadn't finished picking the jury. And then we were just in the courtroom, just the lawyers, all the prospective jurors were out. And she read me the riot act, and she actually accused me of racial animus, me, against the white women, because she said I was way more aggressive with them than I was with the black folks. So imagine how I'm feeling. So I had to go through a process where I justified from a race-neutral standpoint every single reason and question that I asked each of those white jurors in that row as to why they shouldn't be on my jury. I can tell you, my opposing counsel, who was white, was stunned. He thought he had done something wrong. He couldn't believe it. He said he's never seen anything like it, ever. Ever, ever. And in that, at the end of the day, I had 10 out of the 12 jurors were African American, and we settled the case. But let me tell you, sweating bullets, so sometimes even it's important to have judges like Judge Kimberly Esmond Adams, who bring a sense of fairness and integrity to the process, because sometimes we don't often get that type of fairness and integrity, and that's real for us. So we need you all to be there. We're fighting your fight, you're fighting our fight.
Gabe was about to say something.
Ain't nobody running against Judge Adams, and so you up here campaigning for him. They scared to run against her. Ain't nobody running against Judge Adams.
I'm making the point of how stellar she is, based on my national practice and seeing other judges who have a different way of conducting their courtrooms.
Yeah, I want to kind of talk about it. Thank you, CK, over and over again. Not Gabe, but thank you. Actually, we were colleagues, but he also ended up trying cases before me. You should know.
I got stories for that.
That's a whole nother panel. I had to have a come to Jesus meeting at the bench with him during one of the trials.
She sure did.
I told him I need you to bring it all the way down, or there's a place for you right behind that door. We got it together.
Well, since she opened the door, as lawyers would say, we were at the bench, and I wouldn't look at her. I was so mad at her for ruling against me. I walked door to door for this, judge, the best judge. And so she ruled against me, and she said, Mr. Banks, you're not looking at me. I'm ordering you to look at me. Judge, I don't know. We might need a break. I might say something that I don't need to say. But it was a tremendous experience.
And he won, by the way. Yeah. He won, by the way. Judge Schumer, would you talk about why it is, and you'll often hear citizens who don't understand the process say, well, why can't the judge just decide the cases, right? Why do we need juries? And so when judges make decisions and try cases, those are called bench trials. So why is it that you believe that jury trials are a necessary part of our system, even in comparison perhaps to bench trials?
Well, I'll say this. The Aretha Franklin case reminds me that probate courts also do jury trials in Georgia. There are a few. 28 out of 159 counties can hold jury trials. So not every county can do jury trials in this state. We have a two-tiered system in probate courts. And the Aretha Franklin case just reminds me that there might have been a totally different outcome in that case had it been a bench trial. Of course, this was in Michigan, so I can't speak to what happened in that trial. But when you have jurors who can make a decision and listen to evidence and determine that a handwritten document is in fact someone's will, that tells you that jurors can make a difference. Having a jury trial can matter as opposed to what a judge might determine. And I started thinking about what I might determine if someone presented a handwritten document that's not witnessed like a will, not executed in the same formalities. But then you have people who are listening to evidence and make a reasoned decision based on what they've heard. And I think that opportunity is worthy of having it played out in a court. Everything cannot be a bench trial.
Well, and it's also important to have jurors because it's political when you're talking about the state system, right? Mm-hmm. Federal system, you're being appointed by the president, for life. Whereas, unlike Judge Adams, many of the judges that you appear in front of are appointed by the governor. And so when you're appointed by the governor, Roy Barnes was the last Democratic governor? And so Sonny Perdue, Deal, and ultimately Kemp, and in fairness to Kemp, he has probably done a better job than Sonny Perdue and Deal in appointing African Americans to the bench. But you're talking about Republican governors appointing very conservative jurists to protect the Federalist Society. That's a part of their MO. And so when you're talking about who you're appearing in front of, if it is a judge, more likely you are appearing in front of someone who did not run but was appointed. And their conservative bent may not be favorable to the facts and issues that you have to present to him or her. And so it's very important that you have a collective pool of individuals that come from all walks of life. For example, a lot of jurors will ask the question in my trial, after the trial is over, why did you select me? And sometimes I try to preemptively tell them about that in closing arguments. It may be objectionable, but for example, I wanted to select a Walmart black woman who was a supervisor. And throughout the whole trial, she wouldn't look at me. And I was trying to figure out if she was on my side or not. I was like, wait a minute.
You wanted her to look at you?
I wanted her to look at me because if she's looking at me, then I'm trying to make love to my jurors. Lord, forgive me. But at the end of the day, she wouldn't look at me at trial. And so in summation, I made the decision to literally address her. And I wanted her to know why I selected her. And because she would look down every time I spoke. And so I know some of you, is what I said to her or to them, want to know why you were selected. Why on earth would I select a supervisor from Walmart? And all of a sudden she looked up and I had her attention. And let me tell you, once I had it, I didn't lose that moment. But as a supervisor from Walmart, we're dealing with a legal dispute that she resolves on a day-to-day basis. You know what I mean? As a supervisor, she is resolving customer disputes and she is resolving disputes amongst employees. And I wanted her to know, we have a legal dispute here and your expertise in what you do on the job on a regular basis is needed here in this courtroom. And let me tell you, she was one of my favorite jurors. She came up and kissed me and hugged me and ultimately gave my client a whole lot of money after. So yeah.
Listen, the experiences they've described just reminds me of how, and the numbers that Mr. Greathouse gave, reminds me that how important it is for us to show up. That jury assembly room is packed with people when the jury summonses go out. You have got to see a diverse pool of people sitting out there with all of these courts selecting from that same group. I don't know how many courtrooms there are in Fulton County now, 28, 30, I don't, you know, over 30 courtrooms, and they're all selecting pools of jurors to hear cases, as well as probate courts. We pull from the same Superior Court group from their jury clerk. So, I mean, it matters that the pool of people is diverse.
And to that point, Mr. Greathouse, you want to share?
I could add one thing. This had to have been about 28 years ago, and I think it was Judge Don Langum. I was a brand new attorney. I had another attorney that I was sitting second chair with, getting my feet wet in the jury trial. And I had on my nice new suit and my watch and shoes and everything. And I'm just a polished new attorney. And I think the charge was burglary or something like that. We spent about a day and a half picking a jury, and ultimately we get that case worked out so that we don't have a trial. But one of the jurors came and spoke to me. And I mean, to me, it was obvious that I was not the defendant. But one of the jurors, a Caucasian juror, came and said, well, we thought that you were the defendant. And I asked, what made you think that? And the response was, well, you were dressed nice, hair was cut, you looked good, and we just thought that the attorney was trying to pull a fast one over on us. I never would have thought that in a million years if that woman hadn't said it. So when you get the opportunity to serve, you get to bring your perspective of life into that jury room, and you get to combat some of those misconceptions.
And ultimately, this is not about excluding other races. I want to be clear that the conversation is not at all about that. It is about why service by members of African American descent on juries is important. Ultimately, what we all are looking for in the justice system is a fair and impartial jury. Yeah. Some folks who will fairly evaluate the facts and apply the law that the court gives them. And so that's what we are looking for. Mr. Greathouse, Judge Toomer touched on this, and you mentioned also earlier how the list is drawn. I've had folks who told me they won't register to vote because they don't want to serve on a jury, as ridiculous as that sounds. But we got smart because we knew that there would be some people who thought that would get them out of service, but most people want to drive. So in addition to the voter rolls, we also pull from the driver rolls. So unless you don't want to vote and don't want to drive, you're going to end up on a jury list somewhere. Would you share with our audience how often they can expect to be summoned? And then after that, we'll talk about reasons that their service can be deferred or that they might, in fact, be able to be excused.
Absolutely. So it's important to understand that I want to say a couple of things. I didn't get a chance to say some things. So I'm going to just take one moment to say that I think this is a call to action. I've worked in jury services for 5 years, and I've heard every excuse kind of in the book. none of them after a while seems to be very unusual or wild after you hear them so many times. A couple of times, people over the course of those 5 years would try to get out of jury duty by saying they're guilty. They hadn't heard a shred of evidence. They hadn't went to a courtroom and understood what the case was about.
They say that in the jury clerks?
They say that in the jury
Wow.
to try to get out. I'm just going to go down, when I go down there, I'm going to say they're guilty. And so I think it's important to recognize and know that if they're saying that out in the open, they're certainly saying that in private. And when you're in a jury room and you're deciding you're one of those 12, you have a voice, you have an opportunity to say something, to stand up and make sure that those kind of things don't happen. So it's really a call to action to be present, because there's many systemic barriers that we face on a daily basis. But when you get that summons, it's almost an invitation to come to say something and do something and stand up and be a part of this system and make sure that the system is fair. Now, Judge, I know you asked me a question and I wanted to say that. So can you ask that question one more time?
I can. I wanted to explain how often citizens can expect to be served, to be called to serve, and then we'll talk about exemptions.
Absolutely. So we send out we get this master list once a year. You can expect to serve, if you get a summons, once every 12 months. And so if you get a summons after you've already served, you just need to contact our office. You're not going to serve in January and then get another summons in February. That's not how it works. So you only can serve one time per 12 months. And we are here to make sure that happens. We'll accept your call, your email. You can fax it to us. If you get 2 summons in a very short period of time, you should contact our office immediately so that we can rectify and find out what the problem is so that you're not serving multiple times. And we're here to do that. We want to create a really good jury service experience, and we're available to do that.
And Tim, if we're able to get up slide number 4, I just want to discuss some of the reasons that individuals can be exempt from service, and we want to provide that information so that you're aware, but not because we expect you to try to do any of these things. So you heard Judge Toomer talk about, and Mr. Greathouse, if you're 70 years of age and you no longer wish to serve, then you in fact can be excused. That is a legal basis for excusal, and if you don't want to serve, you don't have to serve. You also, as Mr. Greathouse just indicated, should not be called to serve more than once in a 12-month period. And in Fulton County, we've now combined all of our courts, and so you receive a single summons for state court, superior court, and probate court. So if you serve during that 12 period, and service in Fulton County is reporting for duty. And let me just stop parenthetically and mention something. Mr. Greathouse talked about invitations. So one of the things that I have to explain to jurors often is that when you receive a summons, it is not an invitation for you to show up if you want to or when you want to. A summons compels you to honor it and show up for service. And what that means, of course, is that if you fail to honor the summons, then you could face the possibility of being held in contempt. And in the state of Georgia, certainly in our county, if you are held in contempt, you can be fined up to $500, and you also can be sentenced to time in jail of up to 30 days. Long time. And so it's important that citizens understand that. I was one of the judges, and you remember, Mr. Greathouse, this is not new to me. When I began serving as a judge, I was disturbed by the fact that we were having to send out so many summonses to get a sufficient number of jurors to perform the business of the court. And so if, for example, we needed 100 jurors, we were having to send upwards of 3 to 5 times that number to ensure we had a sufficient yield to get enough jurors to go through the process. And that is, of course, an expense to you as taxpayers. And so at one point, I raised the question and wanted to know what we were doing when jurors didn't show up. And to my dismay, I found out nothing, absolutely nothing. So for years, we had folks not showing up. And then there were some people who were faithful and showed up every time they were summoned, which means that they were getting the brunt of that service that we should all be doing. And so I approached my colleagues about starting what we called an FTA program. An FTA stands for failure to appear. It wasn't very popular, but I believed as judges we had a responsibility that we could not and should not abdicate and allow people to simply not show up without being held accountable. So at the time that we started that program, we probably had about, a 45% yield rate? That means that if we summoned 100 people, we could only expect about 45 to show up, which is not good. We began that program. We sent out notice. We had it on radios and on our website, and actually began the program. And I started because none of my colleagues understandably wanted to do it, because we all are elected. Even if the governor appoints you, at some point you have to stand for election. So you can imagine that the idea of holding citizens accountable and doing things that might not be popular wasn't something that people were excited about. But I believe that I was elected to uphold the law across the board. And I also believed that anybody who would not vote for me because we held them accountable wasn't someone whose vote I was interested in anyway. Plus, I knew my church would take care of me, right? Because it's not just me, it's Cascade United Methodist Church Day, to be perfectly clear. So we started this program, and we called citizens in who were not showing up. And when Mr. Greathouse tells you about excuses, oh, the dog ate my homework, I put the summons on my refrigerator, I think it was in my trunk, I don't check my mail but once every 6 months. I mean, all kinds of things. If you can imagine it, we heard it. So we went through that process. And at the end of it, I am pleased to report that we did not, we actually found contempt for several, but we did not put anyone in jail. However, we did impose monetary fines. But the good part of that is we were able to help citizens understand why serving was important. Citizens of all stripes. And our yield rate went from 45% to about 85%, I think.
That is correct.
Right, so it was successful. Now, you all are here, and you might be the first to hear it, but we probably need to revisit that, because post-COVID, we are back in the same category, are we not, Ms. Von Kelch? Where we're having those same problems. And so the FTA program may be coming to a community near you. So I just wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to look at some of the exemptions. 70 years of age or older, not more than 12 months. If you have a mental or physical impairment, and again, that doesn't mean that you've got a medical issue, because we can accommodate medical conditions. If you are a student, you're enrolled in school, and it's full-time, those are some of the bases on which you can be excused. The only other thing that I wanted to show by way of slide is slide number 7. We also hear from jurors quite often that if they serve, their employers will fire them. And we want to make sure that everyone is perfectly clear that to fire a citizen in this county for failing to report to work because they are serving on jury duty is a violation of the law. And so whether they pay you is between you and your employer. We'll give you a piece of change to buy lunch, and that's about all we'll buy. But jurors cannot be subject to any adverse employment action because they're serving on juries. So it's really, really important to know that.
Judge, can you talk about hardships?
Yes.
And how that impacts jury service?
Absolutely, I can. You want to say something?
I just wanted to add one thing. Normally, the jurors that do everything they can to get off a jury and ultimately get seated, at the end of the trial, almost every time what they'll say is, that was so enlightening and enriching, and I can't wait to serve again.
Mr. Kenner is absolutely correct. I should have brought one or two of the letters I've received from the type of people that Mr. Banks and Ms. Hoffler have described, who had absolutely no interest in serving on juries. And at the end of the process, we're so moved by their participation and left with a totally different appreciation for our system of justice. And they send me letters and tell me that, Judge, I didn't want to be there. You know I didn't want to be there. I told you I had a hardship. I was scheduled to go on a trip a week after the trial, or I needed to pick my children up from school. And one exemption that I missed is if you are a caregiver for a child under the age of 7 years, and you're the primary caregiver, you can be excused. But these are people who worked and were able to go to their jobs. But we hear all kinds of things around hardships: travel, work, difficulty picking up children, medical appointments. Those things do not permit you to be excused from service, but can be considered by the court. And I will tell you that I have a policy and a practice that I follow so that I'm consistent. So when people tell me they plan vacations and it's during the time that they've been called, once they've come in for the process, because the jury clerk cannot excuse anyone, I have decided that the best way for me to evaluate those situations is If the juror is able to provide confirmation of plans, travel, an airline ticket, a conference registration, a hotel reservation, and I can confirm in writing, I need evidence, I'm a judge, that those things were done before the summonses were received. And so Ms. Von Kelter, Mr. Greathouse can tell you, I was probably one of the only judges who used to ask, when were the summonses mailed? So when they give me the list, and I ask a lot for a reason, but now they understand why I was asking that question, because I don't want to make arbitrary decisions. So if I am able to determine that you made those arrangements before you were summoned, then I'm going to honor that, because you can't put your life on hold waiting to determine if you're going to be summoned. But if I determine that you received the summons and 2 weeks later, all of a sudden you need to go on vacation, or there's this conference that you just can't miss, and Judge, we're having a project at work and I'm the lead on the project, and if I'm not there, the project will fall apart, right? If that happens, then you're gonna have to sit with me for a little while. We're gonna become cozy. Now, whether you are selected ultimately will play out during the course of the process, but I will not excuse you on those bases. And you know, we have lots of entrepreneurs, right? Barbers and cosmetologists. I love my hairstylist, and if I miss my appointment, my little feelings will be hurt, but that's sometimes what happens. And so those kinds of things are not the kind of hardships that will permit you to be excused. We try to be respectful of jurors' time and get through the trial in an efficient way, but we need you to serve. So as we're wrapping up, before we open the floor for any questions, were there any other particular jury experiences that anyone wanted to share?
Well, you know, Your Honor, there was a case that I had of a juror who had a communication issue, if I might share that. So we had a trial in Fulton County, and we had an African-American male juror who we asked a lot of questions, general questions. You know, how many of you read the Wall Street Journal? Because we want to know also the political orientation. How many of you read Forbes? How many of you watch this? How many of you watch that? To every question, he raised his hand. Every question. We asked, how many of you have an undergraduate degree? How many of you have a master's? How many of you have a PhD? Every question he raised his hand. So that was the general question. Then when we got to the individual voir dire, meaning we had to individually speak to the jurors because we had a large, this was a high-stakes case. So his name was, let's just say, Mr. Johnson. So we brought Mr. Johnson up, and we said, so Mr. Johnson, you said that, you know, you had an experience, this is the medical negligence case involving a cardiac condition, and you said that your sister had a cardiac condition. When we asked you, you raised your hand about whether a family member had experienced this, and you raised your hand. Could you tell us a little bit about that? And this is what he responded. Well, I was all quiet, but I went up there, and then we wanted to do it, and then we went. What? So, I knew he should be on our jury because I knew that he could write some zeros. He could recommend some zeros. I'm just being funny. But nobody understood a word he was saying. So my co-counsel said, well, I understand. What he said was, you know, he said, because, you know, we all have, you know, family who, you know, might speak Ebonics and so. So we are trying to figure, and we don't want to humiliate him. Right. Because it's a situation where he's communicating and there's not a single person who can understand. We might understand a word or two. My white counterparts didn't understand a single word or two, and so we're all looking at each other. The judge is looking at us. The judge calls us to the bench and says, plaintiffs, what do you say? Well, we don't know if this is just an isolated incident. Let's ask another question. Because we thought maybe we weren't sure, because it was really something I've never seen. So we asked another question, and he said, we understood not a single word. So the judge called us back up. Counsel, do you have anything to say? And we had to say, yes, we feel that he should be excused, because we could not, no matter what, salvage him, because we could not. He may have been able to understand what we were saying, but nobody could understand a word that he said. So that's an example of a juror who wanted to serve. We were excited about him wanting to serve, but we couldn't understand a single solitary word that he said, unfortunately. And I really thought he was going to be a great juror for my Venire. So that's an isolated incident. I bring just some levity to it to say, if you are that person who wants to serve, please serve, but don't answer yes to every question, because we're going to follow up with asking you questions about the question that you say yes to, and we have to understand your answers. So I just thought I'd bring some humor into an actual thing that happened in corporate.
If CK was not such a great attorney, I think she could have been an excellent storyteller.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I saw you picking up your microphone. Was there something you wanted to offer, Madam President?
I would just say that I have wanted to serve on the jury. They will not pick me.
Wonder why?
I gave them all the good answers too, and they would not pick me. But I wanted to ask people to be curious, because one of the reasons I wanted to serve on that jury is because I wanted to know what happens in that jury room. I wanted to be a part of that process. I talked to one of my friends earlier today, and she had served when she was like 19 years old. And she talked about how ridiculous the experience was in the jury room in terms of people just wanting to go home and things like that. And so it was important for her to be a voice of reason. And so we hope that you will show up and be a voice of reason in that jury room and get people to focus on the issue at hand and to do the right thing. But if you watch How to Get Get Away with Murder, and you like Law and Order, I'm dating myself with the Law and Order situation, then you should be interested and be curious about being a part of that process, right? To watch it on TV and then also be a part of what happens in these courtrooms across the country. And so I encourage you to be curious, to want to know more, because the more you know, the better you can be advocates outside of the courtroom.
Absolutely.
Look, if I could say one thing, a lot of people think that when we're picking a jury, that we say, I want that one, I want that person, I want that person. What we're really doing is deselecting a jury. We're trying to get rid of people that we think will be the most harmful to our client, and the state is doing the same thing. They're trying to get rid of people that they think will unjustly acquit someone. So we're not saying, I want you have a pretty smile and nice clothes and you've got the swag, I want you. That's not how it works. We're just trying to get rid of the worst on both ends of the spectrum, and the jury is selected from what's left in the middle.
So before we take closing remarks from our panelists, I did want to open the floor in the event, hey Cheryl, in the event that there are any questions. Yes, sir. He's bringing the microphone to you. It's just a moment. We want folks watching online to be able to hear you. Right behind you.
I can.
No,
there it goes. Excuse me. I want to make a comment about something that was jested about. It has to do with you, Judge. It has to do with women participating in the legal system, particularly women of color. For justice to prevail, people have to be able to step out of their own seat and listen. Women of color in America have to get out of their seat to deal with men, have to get out of their seat to deal with white people. So there is a set of skills that make them more able to see the plight of an other. The reason that I think that I worked in the insurance industry, I still do for 40 years, so in civil litigation, this becomes there's big dollars tied to this. Right. So I think that when you get in a jury room, I hate to say this, but there are white jurors in that room, and if there's a black man in that room who has a position that's contrary to the other jurors, it's very difficult for white jurors to listen to him. However, black women have some interesting skills to be able to bring those people along because they do understand about being an other. So I would say to you, black women particularly can make a big impact on there being equity in decisions out of court by more often serving on juries.
It's an interesting comment and perspective. Thank you for sharing that.
You know, that comes back to what I said earlier. Not everyone sees the same thing when they look in our face.
I think you're right in a number of ways because there is the need to build consensus. As I said earlier, everyone has a single vote. And certainly in most of the cases, if there is not a unanimous verdict reached, then there is no verdict. So that's a very interesting perspective.
I'll just say this too. He made a comment about the insurance industry. And so when I left the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, I defended doctors and hospitals and medical facilities when they were sued for medical malpractice. And what I had to do primarily for that 5-year period is to work closely with insurance companies who insured our doctors and medical health care providers and write reports. And in those reports, we would have to talk about a few things that were important to the adjusters so that they could evaluate and assess whether or not there was a risk-benefit analysis as to whether or not to resolve the case or to allow the case to go to trial. One of the issues is okay, well, who is the plaintiff's lawyer? Who's the plaintiff's lawyer and are they competent? Are they competent?
Competent.
But one of the significant factors was, what is the venue of the case? Mm-hmm. Is it in Clayton County? Is it in Bibb County? Is it in Fulton County? Is it in DeKalb County? Is it in Spalding? And so all of those things, when you're talking about the venue of the case, you're talking about demographics. And that's what we've been talking about, is about the more diverse the demographics, the more risk adverse, if you will, adjusters will say, wait a minute, maybe we need to resolve this case. I'll tell you, I was just trying a case in Henry County in April. It was a car accident case. She suffered from a herniated disc. She was injured, and there were some recommendations for surgical intervention. She decided against surgery and decided to live with the pain. When the jury came out, let me tell you, the first 25 jurors looked like me. And I said to the defense, because I was plaintiff's counsel, I looked over to him, you sure you don't want to, these are my folk, I'm going to be preaching to them, are you sure you don't want to resolve this case? And I will tell you, it was a delight to see so many diverse jurors. I mean, not just African Americans, but Hispanics and Asians on the jury pool. And I tell you, it does make a difference.
Absolutely. And I will also just share in connection with the work that I do day in and day out. I am really, really honored to serve in Fulton County because I do believe that as judicial service goes, we are very fortunate to have diverse juries. In many instances, they could be more diverse, but our juries do a fantastic job. They absolutely do a fantastic job. And I think that that is a reflection of who we are as a city, but I can tell you that it also, and a county, but it's also a reflection of the fact that there typically is someone of color sitting in that jury room. I'll share very quickly with you a comment that was made to me by a juror, and I don't even know that she understood quite what she was saying. But I always go back at the conclusion of trials and have conversations with the jury. And so she said to me when I walked in, Judge, this was a great experience, white woman, this was a great experience. We were a fantastic jury, we all got along. This is probably the best jury you've ever had. And I just kind of listened, right? Because at that point I hadn't shared how long I'd served on the bench. I hadn't shared what my experience had been as a trial lawyer, had not shared any of those things. So I thought it was a pretty big assumption to make. And so she went on talking about how well they worked together and how they were all singing out of the same hymn book and it wasn't very difficult for them to reach a verdict. And so I listened, and when she finished, I said to her, so why do you think that was? And she said, well, you know, we're all alike, right? And so there was only one African American on that jury, one of the few instances where I didn't have more diversity. And so I said to her, I said, well, you might be surprised to know that homogeneous juries typically don't reach the best results, and that having the benefit of someone, of people of other races, of other experiences, of other backgrounds, tends to lead to a more rigorous deliberative process which means that there typically are better factual findings. That's what the data suggests. And so I don't even know that she recognized that in saying that, what she essentially was saying is that we're better to serve and evaluate the evidence than everybody else. So it really is important. Your point about women, your point, of course, and the point that we're trying to make in all of this about diversity. Mr. Kenner, was there something you wanted to add?
Yes, Judge, I don't know if most of my clients would agree with you that the jurors do a great job.
They probably wouldn't, Mr. Kenner. But I think if they went to other jurisdictions, it would probably be even worse. I have two fantastic public defenders from Mr. Kenner's office who are assigned to my courtroom, and I am very, very pleased. One is a white woman, the other is an African-American man. So again, even diversity and representation matters. Did I see another question on this side?
Yes, actually, if I might take a liberty, I have two things, and it's kind of for clarification. One,
and for everyone on the panel, that is Judge Toomer's husband.
That's a great suit you have. Thank you. It's really nice.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Could you explain, when you're filling out your questionnaire, some people have a tendency to embellish their personal experiences. Is there a possibility that might come in conflict once a verdict was rendered, where they actually said, I'm a PhD and I'm actually a high school graduate? And then the other one is, could somebody maybe jump into, oftentimes the loss of property that is family property, and how jurors with diversity can help to protect?
All right. You want to take the first question?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take the
Greathouse?
first question. It is expected that sometimes people may embellish when they answer the questionnaire. But we rely on the trial lawyers and the judges to weed those things out. I think we were talking about that a few moments ago. There's going to be a lot of questions about different kinds of things. And the trial lawyers and the judges are keenly listening and paying attention to those things. And so they are able to pull out those things to ensure that people are given true answers and being very honest about their experiences, so that we have that kind of diversity on a jury panel. Right. Right. And so if they state something incorrectly, it's going to come out, because they're going to ask those questions. The judge and the trial lawyers are provided all of the information. They have an opportunity to ask questions about what's on that questionnaire. The questionnaire has about 10 questions, and most of those questions are pretty straightforward. Are you a citizen of Fulton County? Are you over the age of 18 years old? Have you served as an elected official? Your phone number is very basic. But there is a couple of instances where someone can say, for instance, that they have a PhD when in fact they only have a GED. And those kind of questions can be discerned in the courtroom when they have the opportunity to ask those questions.
And just so that you understand, the information that's compiled by the jury clerk's office and then provided to courts and attorneys is in fact vetted. So during the course of the process, jurors will often wonder how we know certain things about them. We have that information based on the questionnaire. But I can tell you, I don't think that I've experienced many instances where the information has been inflated. I don't know that I've had a GED report that he has a PhD, and we not be able to figure out. There are times, in fact, that we look at the questionnaire, and I am looking at a woman who appears to be in her 70s, let's say, and the questionnaire reflects a person who's much younger. And so there are ways for us to ask questions to verify. And then, of course, you know that when jurors come to courtrooms to go through the process, the first thing they have to do is take an oath to tell the truth. And so in taking that oath, just like in not responding to the summons, if we determine during the course of the process that someone is being untruthful, then there is a legal remedy for that. So fortunately, I have not seen that very much. I don't know if anyone else has seen that. Generally, the information on the questionnaire is pretty good, and if it's not accurate, we're able to get to the bottom of that.
I would just add that folks need to be truthful just generally, right? Because as somebody who has done appellate work, like, we're looking. When we're trying to, folks are filing appeals, we're looking to see if the trial was fair. And we go deep into all aspects of the case. We want to know, did this person say that they did this thing or did not do this thing, and so all of those things sometimes will come out on, even if it doesn't come out at the trial level, on the appellate level, and some of those things can be reversible errors on the back end. So really, it's really important for people to be honest and truthful.
Judge Schumer, do you want to take the second question regarding the disposition of property?
I don't know if I'm a great person to answer this question, but the cases that have come before the probate court in Fulton, everything in probate involves property generally. That's the first thing. Secondly, the things that go to trial that don't settle are generally cases involving commercial companies, banks, financial institutions that are managing money. But when it comes to families disputing in a probate setting, they will very often settle and not go to a jury trial because you're still living with those people. It's not the same as suing a bank. A little different.
Right. So before we wrap up, I wanted to give all of our panelists an opportunity to provide some final remarks. And I will start with you, Mr. Grayhouse. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Yes, sir. There's another question.
Yes. Is there a way
I want you to tell everybody how old you are.
I'm 14.
And then tell everybody what you found out about your mother and I at the beginning of today's forum.
I found out that my mother and the judge have a relationship that lasted from high school, and this is like their reunion.
Had not seen his mother, in almost 40 years, yes. Wow. I was in a high school singing group, and she was a virtuoso. She played piano.
Now you're telling her age.
Small world, yeah. What'd you say?
Now you're telling her age.
Well, you can't tell. You can tell from me, but you can't tell from her. We're glad you have a question, young man. Tell us what your question is.
Is there a way you could volunteer for jury service, or do you have to be summoned?
Excellent question. Did everybody hear that? We've got to volunteer. So the short answer to that question is no, unfortunately not. You have to first be summoned to serve. And once you're summoned, I think you heard the attorneys talk about raising your hands to every question or being too eager. Sometimes being too eager to serve will get you excused from the jury because everybody is kind of suspicious if folks are anxious to serve. But the process starts when you receive a summons to come in for jury service. And I've had lots of 18-year-olds who just graduated from high school. I think I may have had one or two high school students who are 18-year-olds who actually ended up being selected to serve. So you're not quite there yet. I think you're 16, right? 14, I'm sorry. So you're not quite there yet, but as soon as you register to vote and or get your driver's license, your name will be placed on the voter rolls in the county where you reside, which is DeKalb. And once that happens, then there's a possibility that you could be summoned just as well as your mother could be.
But you know what? Your question begs a very good project that I'm going to assign to you, okay? Because if you want to volunteer for service,
come down and sit
you can actually, come back down to the courthouse and sit and observe the process. But I would recommend that in your school, you develop a jury program of your peers. So when a kid ultimately gets in trouble or there's an issue or a dispute within the school, the kids get to decide the issue. It'd be a great, phenomenal program and project for you to start, and I would imagine that your administrators would appreciate it and be receptive to it.
Yeah, like a hearing panel or a student board. It's a great idea. And if you want to talk about that now that I've reconnected with your mother, you know that you can reach out. Do we have any other questions? Yes, please.
So I know that we talked a little bit about criminal law and a little bit civil in terms of probate, but could you speak to the importance of, I know in Georgia you can have a jury trial for a divorce or in family law scenarios, so could you speak to the importance of, one, the jury trial in the family law context, as well as the state of our families, African-American families, and what it looks like for us to serve on juries in the family law context, being divorce, child support,
Excellent question. So I don't know, has anyone done any matrimonial work? So you are absolutely correct. In our state, you are and may receive a trial in domestic relations matters. The process is the same as in civil cases and in criminal cases. The jury goes through the same jury selection process, and those attorneys are, as Mr. Kenner explained, deselecting certain folks to end up with a panel of individuals that the attorneys and court believe will be a fair and impartial jury. The interesting thing I think about the dynamics in family law, and I've not actually presided over family cases, but I can tell you, having filled in on one occasion for a colleague in the jury part of the charge part, you want, again, to have a diverse jury, because when family issues are coming before the court and before juries that involve not just the disposition of assets, property, but some of those decisions can also involve things that concern the children. And that's where you really need a diversity of experience. You find in some communities that women are the primary earners, and sometimes it's the other way, where men are the primary earners. I think, to the point that was made earlier, women tend to see things much more broadly in terms of who's able to provide financial support, whether both of those individuals should be able to support themselves. So all of the experiences, the individual experiences that we bring to bear on jury service is important in the family context, just as it is in the criminal and civil context. That's an excellent question. And we need to serve in those cases as well, because we are now fortunately in situations sometimes where we do have assets that need to be split. There are issues that need to be resolved. And it looks a little different than it looked many, many years ago. I mean, we've got some black families with high net worth divorces, a lot of money involved, property, all of those kinds of things. And so you want to ensure during those types of trials, just as with any other, that the people who are selected to serve are focused on finding the truth of the matter and hopefully getting to a resolution that is fair and just to both parties. So it is equally important to serve in the family context, just as it is in criminal and civil cases. Great question. Thank you. Yes, sir. We got a hot bench, y'all.
First and foremost, thank you all for your perspective and your presence. But my question was, how do we as members of the black community cultivate a more critical expression of our cultural experiences? Because I know many of my friends, they know what they've been through, but they struggle to express it. And I know that in juror pools, it's important that we learn how to harness our experiences in the search, for impartiality. So how do you think that we as black people, but most importantly as youth, should begin cultivating that more critical expression?
All right, young man, y'all ready for that?
I think I can answer.
That
was deep.
That's my classmate's other son. Tell them how old you are.
15.
All right?
You're 15. 15?
Yes.
Both these boys have bass in their voice. I don't know where they...
Look,
outstanding question. That is and I've seen that. That's an outstanding question. Mr. Kennedy?
Look, I think it starts with you getting involved in coming to forums like this, listening and learning and sharing your experiences with your friends. I think that's where it starts. When your parents are going to serve on a jury or jury service, asking questions, being curious. You can find out almost anything you want to know about jury service on the internet. May not all be true, but you can find out something about it. And
I'll say this, is that I think one of the things that will help is that we openly discuss the issues of race with our counterparts. You know, I have a white law partner, and, you know, he grew up in Gainesville. I grew up in a small town, Delaware, Ohio. Kind of a similar upbringing, but different experiences. You know, when I got my driver's license and, you know, things like that, and I started to drive and have cell phones and get stopped by the police and ultimately had a gun held to me by the police, he's never experienced that before. But when I talk to him about that, right, he starts to appreciate things from a different perspective and starts to understand and appreciate why, you know, people of color sometimes, you know, view things differently. And so we will have, because we're always talking about our prospective jurors and how to present a case and what their mindset might be and what type of juror we need on a particular case. And don't get me wrong, not all black people think alike. Right. And there are some black people that will convict you faster than some white people. Let's just be clear about that. And so, but talking about race and being willing to have an open discussion, not putting anybody on the chopping block and making them feel uncomfortable, but being able to listen, to have that dialogue, I think that that is a move in the right direction, because I don't think we talk about race enough, frankly. And, you know, sometimes whites are afraid to talk about it because they're fearful that they may be judged as being racist. Sometimes blacks are afraid to talk about it because they might fear that no one's going to understand their perspective. But talking about it in an open setting and being willing to be honest with each other is, in my opinion, one of the first steps to being that critical perspective that you think is needed.
Do you want to say something about that?
I would echo that, and I would also say practice, right? But we as adults have to allow our young folks to practice, right? Allowing space for them to ask questions and for us to listen. We have to slow down sometimes. Yeah, we have to cook and we have to do work at night and all these things, but we also have to ask our kids, what do you think? Did you see what happened on the news? What are your thoughts around that? So that we give them opportunities to share what they're thinking, what they're holding, and feel like they have safe space. I think Molly Davis has what they call Black Man Lab, where he invites young men together for mentorship, but also to gather with each other and to have conversations. And so I think one of a responsibility of us as older adults is to create more spaces like that where our young folks get to practice sharing what is what's on their minds, what their experiences are in ways that allow them to be open, and instead of just saying you're a kid, stay in a kid's place, because when we allow those things, and then we create young men like this who are willing to be in these positions and to serve on juries, et cetera, but want to be able to share their experiences in a way that will be heard.
I'll just add this too. I mean, you're 14, you're 15. The manner in which you guys asked your questions, you guys are on the right path. Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. I will say in jury selection, oftentimes we will get jurors who are very young, 18 years old. That's the starting age you can be a juror. And one of the questions that I will always ask my younger jurors is, you will be the youngest juror if selected on the panel. Are you going to be able to hold your own when you're deliberating back in the jury room with some of your fellow jurors who are older than you? Will you cave or cower down, or will you hold your own and have your own opinions and be willing to challenge the others' opinions that you're deliberating with? And so it's very important as a young individual to stand your ground, so to speak, and to speak up and not be afraid to have an opinion.
And I think just as Ms. Gansey shared, we have to create space, but then you have to feel comfortable taking up space, right?
That is true.
Right? You matter. Your experiences matter, even if you are the only one who's had that experience. And in the jury room in particular, that experience often informs the process. I will tell you that when I preside over cases and have individuals who stand to speak, there's a point during the process where just about everyone has to stand and answer questions and then be able to respond to questions that are asked by attorneys. I am always very proud. I just have to be honest. I'm a mom and I have a son. I'm always very proud when young African American men are able to come into the court and stand up and express who they are, what their experiences have been, and then everybody has to listen. Because in some instances, the only thing they've seen about us is the negativity on television. And so when you are able to stand up and speak your truth, whatever that truth might be, we are all listening. And then there are people that you are informing and giving a different perspective just by saying your truth. So you have to get comfortable taking up space and know that whatever your experience is, you don't need to minimize it to make everybody else comfortable. It's your experience. You are entitled to it, and this process is one where that experience has to be shared and is valued. Does that make sense? So I thank you for that question. That was an outstanding question.
I was just going to observe one thing about this family is it's clear that they have already and have for some time given them the space to articulate their opinions. You have to be fearless once you step outside of your house in making observations and comments. And I know CK knows this because she's gone to school in various countries. My daughters know it. We taught them and shared with them that they already have what they need to be able to articulate wherever they are, in whatever company they have. And once you keep developing that skill set, you'll be fearless in a jury room if you're the only African American there.
Look, you all need to put your arms around your mother and give her a big hug because it's clear she's doing a great job. She's doing a great job.
I would also say, I just want to add that being fearless doesn't look a certain way, right? I'm an introvert, as you may be able to understand. But introverts often are very observant. They can tell you what everybody wore, all of the facial expressions, because they're sitting back and they're watching and they're observing. And oftentimes when they finally speak, it's something that you want to hear. And so I don't want you to feel like you need to be somebody different than who you are. You just need to be confident in your experiences and what you bring. And if the court selected you, right, if the prosecutor and defense attorney, et cetera, selected you, then you're supposed to be in that space. And you should just lean on that, but you don't have to be anybody other than who you are.
Thank you. Outstanding. I think that's a wonderful way for us to wrap up. I don't know if anybody wants to make any closing remarks. I'll open the floor for that. And from our panel, Ms. Whitehouse, anything?
I just want to say one thing. Thank you for inviting me. This has been an awesome opportunity. I said earlier that it's a service to work for the court, particularly in jury services. It's where I learned a lot, and it's where I think when I had the opportunity, I want to educate people a lot. And this has been an opportunity, I think, hopefully today, where I was able to share some things with you all. It's a call to action. When you get the summons, we need you there. When your cousin gets it and they don't want to go, you've been here tonight. Tell your cousin how important it is that they show up and participate in the jury services process. And lastly, when you get your summons, please read it thoroughly, pay attention to the date, pay attention to the time. If you have any kinds of questions, please reach out to the number that's on that summons, and we are there to answer those questions because we want you to be an informed citizen about what the process is, and we're here to make that on a daily basis happen for you all. So get your summons, call us if you have questions, and we'll be there to answer them for you. Thank you.
Thank you. And remember that summons is not an invitation.
Look, just spread the word of the importance of your participation in the jury process like you're spreading the gospel.
Thank you. Ms. Gansey.
Show up. Sit down and, what did you say, show up and sit down? Step up and sit down. We need you. Our communities need you. And the system of justice needs your perspective. And so we just encourage you to step up, to be curious about the process and to continue to learn more and invite your friends to do the same.
Judge Schumer?
I would simply say that social justice issues begin with you where you are. Answer a jury summons. When you get one, show up.
Mr. Banks?
I would just say that besides the legal obligation that you have when you receive a summons to serve, you should really be thinking about the moral responsibility that you have based upon all the things that have been sacrificed for you to serve. People have bled, died, and fought for you to serve and have a voice within our community to resolve disputes, and to negate that obligation is really, in my opinion, a sin. And so when we in the church, if you don't want to sin, just go ahead and serve.
Thank you. And last but most certainly not least, Ms. Hoffler.
I would just echo what everyone said. And I would say to these young men, I was almost speechless listening to you all. So to your mother, praise be to you. I think that we have to just remember, again, like everyone said, that there are people who have died so that we would have this opportunity. We are in a crisis of huge proportions in this country. Huge proportion. And I believe it begins and ends with jury service, being willing to serve, and look at it as your social justice obligation so the generations after you understand the importance of it. And I believe it's something that is God ordained. And if we put God first, then we would understand that it's important to serve on juries. And also, I mentioned the example of the communications, and sometimes we don't communicate well, and that's how that instance, that example, we didn't communicate well. But with dignity and integrity, we allowed that juror to be excused, because the one thing that I was not going to allow happen in that case, nor was the judge, was for him to be ostracized because he didn't communicate well. But for the grace of God, there go I.
Thank you. Could you all join me in giving our panel a round of applause? It's been absolutely fantastic. And I have to tell you that when I called, all of them, without exception, agreed to come and serve. This has been a wonderful opportunity. I hope that everyone has had an opportunity to learn something. I have a good friend in the audience, and we often have conversations about jury service. She never wants to serve, but I tell her she is precisely the kind of juror that we need. And so I won't call her name, Mr. Board Chair. I won't, but she knows who I'm talking about. I also want to make a couple of acknowledgments. I do want to acknowledge the chair of our church board, Dr. Bill Alexander, is here. I also want to thank our Director of Technology that you've seen working and who's been so instrumental in ensuring that we were able to do this without a hitch, Mr. Timothy Farmer and his staff upstairs. Thank you. I want to thank the marketing team that has done a tremendous job in helping us get the word out for this program. I also want to recognize our jury clerk who is here, Miss Amy Von Kelch. Thank you for being here, Amy. And I think that she has left, but the chair of our worship division, Miss Janie Bradley, who is always here and supportive, was responsible for ensuring that we had greeters this evening. And so I want to thank Janie and the greeters who were here to make sure that you felt welcome coming in. We are not able to have these kinds of programs without the support of the dynamic ministry of the church that I've been a member of for many decades, a church that I love and that has raised and nurtured me. And one of the people who is now in a position of leadership, we met playing softball, and I recruited her, and so we've gone from playing softball together. She was on third base, I was at shortstop, to us serving in ministry together. And it wasn't that long ago, because we can still get down, can't we, Mel? Yeah, don't play with us. Don't let the smooth taste fool you, right? But Miss Melanie Michael is the chair of our outreach division, under which our legal ministry falls, and I'd like to invite her forward to make a few closing remarks. Join me in receiving her.
Good evening, everybody. You think Judge Adams is fabulous in those 4-inch heels, but put some cleats on her, and we'll show you something. On behalf of the Outreach Division here at Cascade, I would like to thank all of our distinguished panelists that are represented here this evening. Thank you for your years of serving your communities with excellence. The legal ministry's primary focus is to provide legal information to members of the congregation and the community who seek valued information regarding legal issues. This ministry, as does each ministry here at Cascade, seeks to support the 3 pillars of this church: discipleship, service, and social justice, by allowing and encouraging each of its ministries to answer the needs of the community. This evening, we have done just that. Thank you, Judge Kimberly Esmond Adams, for organizing this Step Up and Sit Down Jury Duty Community Forum. And to you, Judge Toomer, for your leadership as our legal ministry's chair here at Cascade. Thanks to all of you, we leave this evening with further knowledge that jury service is a civic duty and an honored privilege bestowed upon all of us as citizens. I will conclude with this Outreach Division's guiding scripture, which is, "For we are God's handiwork, created in Jesus Christ to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." And now that I've stepped up, time for me to sit down.
Thank you. So before we see a video from our actually outreach chair for the Judicial Council of the National Bar, I just want to take one final opportunity to thank each of you for being here this evening. This was a wonderful discussion, and we know it's a school night, but we are grateful, even though it's summer, we are grateful that you all came out. So panel, could you all join me in expressing our appreciation to the audience, please? Thank you all very much. The last set of remarks that you will hear will be from Judge Sharon Murriel, who is, as I indicated, the chair of the Outreach Committee of the National Bar Association Judicial Council.
Good evening. I'm Judge Sharon Murriel. I'd like to thank everyone who participated in tonight's amazing and important program. Special thanks to Cascade United Methodist Church for hosting the event. To our partner in this program, the Georgia Association of Black Women Attorneys, our panelists who are experienced attorneys and judges, the clerk of the court, members of the Judicial Council Outreach Committee, and most importantly, thank you to Judge Kimberly Esmond Adams, the chair of the Judicial Council, whose vision for this forum brings us here tonight. At our very first meeting of the Outreach Committee, Judge Adams discussed her vision of a jury forum, which members of the committee wholeheartedly embraced. Judges from across the country spoke passionately about the importance of jury service and the effect on our communities when juries are not diverse. After tonight's program, I hope that members of the public who joined us here in person or virtually will recognize the importance of jury service. Everyone has an obligation to serve. I've been a judge for almost 15 years in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C. I've been called for jury duty 3 times, and I've served 3 times. The Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court was called for jury duty, and he came. He came with U.S. Marshals, but he came. So the next time you receive a jury summons in the mail, don't get upset. Don't try to think of excuses why you can't serve, and don't blow up the clerk's phone. Instead, step up and sit down. Thank you again for joining us. Good night.
We have some light refreshments that are in the alcove to your left if you'd like to grab some water and refreshments before you leave. And lastly, I do want to thank you all again for being here. I do need to recognize my honeydew. My husband, Michael Adams, is here, who puts up with all of the work that I do outside of the home. So thank you for being here, sweetheart. So we thank you again. Yes, give my husband a round of applause. We thank you all for being here, and have a wonderful evening and a safe journey home. Good night. Thank y'all. Thank you. I want to take some pictures. Yeah.